Hello, I want to welcome everybody to our webinar today. This is Tad Radzinski. Our topic today is understanding your supply chain, identifying risks and creating opportunities. One reason we decided to do a webinar of this topic is there's just a huge amount of activity in the market right now for many of our clients and customers around supply chain requirements. This means that there's various organizations that are basically trying to understand the sustainability of the companies that they buy products from or use services from, as well as understanding details of the sustainability and various impacts of their products. So because this is such a timely topic and there's so much activity around it, we decided that for 2016, we're going to be holding a seminar. This will be our third annual seminar that we've done. And many of the participants in the first two seminars were saying, hey, we really need something around supply chain. We're really struggling to figure out how to get information from our suppliers. We're really trying to understand how we're going to meet the requirements of many of our customers as far as reporting data and disclosing information about the materials in our products and that kind of thing. So on April 20th, 2016, we're going to be holding our third annual seminar, and the goal of this is to get different manufacturers and service providers to participate, but also to invite and bring along some of their key suppliers so we can do some hands-on workshops and different things to help the folks that attend to really develop a supply chain, sustainable supply chain program for them and their key suppliers, kind of get some synergy going among the different groups and really help to improve operations and performance in this area. So hopefully all of you can attend. This is the first in the series of webinars that will build up to this seminar we're doing in April. And today we're going to be really talking about what's happening in supply chain, what's driving the market, why is this important. So let's just talk a little bit about the future of supply chains. I can tell you, having worked in this business for a long time now, that it's pretty incredible to see the amount of requirements and data being requested and information being requested from different manufacturers, different corporations, different federal, state, and local governments, schools, hospitals, institutional investors. A lot of people are really trying to understand what is the sustainability of certain organizations and how sustainable are their products, what are the chemical and material ingredients in these, and it is really forcing different organizations to take a hard look at how they do business. And if you think about it, if you're a manufacturer, the folks in your supply chain are a really critical element into the overall sustainability of your company. First of all, you're getting parts and supplies and materials and raw materials and ingredients from these suppliers. And if you're trying to understand what are the chemical contents, or you're trying to minimize the global warming impacts of your product or make your product more energy efficient or that kind of thing, your suppliers have a huge role in that, because the materials and products and ingredients they supply to you are usually big drivers of not only environmental impacts, but also could be big drivers of health impacts, could create issues around meeting various requirements with chemical reporting and things like that. So there's a lot of benefits to understanding your supply chain, and that's really the first step in the process of building a good sustainable supply chain program, is really understanding what's going on in the supply chain. Knowing what materials you're receiving, knowing who the suppliers are, where they're located, really getting a handle on what they're doing from a sustainability perspective in their own individual organizations. And if you can understand all this, then you'll definitely be well positioned to satisfy any transparency requirements. We're going to be talking about that in a few minutes here. You can definitely use this information to really ramp up your new product development process by integrating sustainable product innovation into that process. It's really important, especially in the age now for especially in the building products world, where a lot of manufacturers are disclosing environmental impacts through environmental product declarations. I don't know if they realize, but the expectation is, first of all, let's get the data out there, and the next thing, once everybody who's educated about these EPDs knows a lot about them, they're going to start saying to the manufacturers, so what are you doing now to reduce these impacts? you've disclosed them, what are you doing from a sustainable product innovation standpoint? So having good information from your supply chain is going to be critical in doing that. Also, there's a lot of sustainable purchasing requirements rolling out in the market right now, and I can guarantee that if you have a good handle on your supply chain, it's going to help you control and reduce your costs for your operations and your products. We are definitely in the age of transparency, and a big thing that's driven that is the Green Building Standards, specifically LEED version 4 and the Living Building Challenge, which have established requirements for or credits within their programs, or even mandatory requirements like in the Living Building Challenge, for building products manufacturers to disclose information about the environmental impacts of their products, as well as the material and chemical ingredients. And that has started I'd say a major movement. It's not only the folks doing buildings, the architects, but now there's city and state governments and federal government really taking a hard look at some of these things, starting to ask questions, what's really in our products. I've heard that the city of Portland is working on legislation around requiring material ingredient disclosure and things like that. So if you're a manufacturer of a product and you don't really know, have a good handle on all the different materials and chemicals and ingredients in your product, you're going to have some challenges ahead of you. So definitely being aware and being ready to meet this age of transparency is going to be really important, and one step in this process, which is a big driver. The other thing that's really happening, which is there's just a tremendous amount of activity right now, is around sustainable purchasing. And most of the activity within sustainable purchasing is pushing down the supply chain. In fact, the new executive order 13693 that was just rolled out by President Obama not only promotes sustainable acquisition and environmentally preferable purchasing within the federal government, but it actually has goals in there to reach down to the supply chain and start to figure out how to reduce global warming impacts and climate change impacts in the products that are being used in the federal government. So if any of you on this webinar are suppliers to the federal government, you need to be aware of this, and you're going to need to really understand how you're going to change your products, and understanding what's going on in your supply chain is going to be a big deal. So as you can see, you're a link in the supply chain because the federal government is going to be asking for this information, but then you're going to have to go back downstream to everybody that's supplying materials to you to really understand what's going on. A couple other things that are pretty exciting: Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council has rolled out their draft guidelines and getting feedback on them. And a lot of the logos you see here are organizations that are really moving forward with establishing sustainable purchasing requirements. So colleges, universities, city, state, local governments. The Sustainability Consortium is even setting up information around some of the hot spots and some of the key attributes of various product categories to help Walmart and other purchasers look for best in class when it comes to reduced impacts from products. We also know that there's a lot of activity out in the world right now around chemicals of concern. For example, the conflict minerals, it's the Dodd-Frank Act basically passed legislation that requires manufacturers to understand where certain materials such as tantalum and tin and different materials like that are coming from, and reporting that. And if you see in this graphic, this illustration right here, understanding what's going on in your supply chain is a major component of understanding how to report to the federal government about conflict minerals. And it's not just conflict minerals. We also have REACH and RoHS requiring disclosure of chemical ingredients for RoHS, looking at lead and cadmium and other things in electronic products, and then REACH is basically trying to understand products that have high potential for creating harm to people and that kind of thing. So all of these things are really driving the market. And then you have large companies like Walmart that not only are they requiring their suppliers to tell them about what they're doing from a sustainability perspective and report information, but Walmart is also now starting to get into the chemical game, where they're trying to understand what chemicals are in certain categories. And Google actually now has criteria that they've rolled out that if you do not have some type of material ingredient disclosure system, whether it's a health product declaration or cradle to cradle or something like that, they will not even consider putting your products in their buildings. And this is pretty big issue here, because if you're a company that's making building products and you're not disclosing or prepared to disclose this information, and you want to sell some of your products to Google, you won't even get considered if you don't have this information to let them know, what are the chemical ingredients and what are the potential hazards of your product. I also just heard on the news this week that Target is starting to step up. They're getting into the chemical game as well, trying to understand what are some of the chemicals in their products, and they're going to be start reaching out to their supply chain. So this seems to be just really expanding and getting bigger and bigger. So one thing to think about when you're evaluating your supply chain is, what is the risk to you as a manufacturer, with your suppliers? First of all, many of you have very diverse supply chains. They're probably located in many countries, different folks that you're buying from. There's a lot of materials and products that are coming from overseas, especially China and India, and those countries definitely don't have the same standards as us when it comes to minimizing impact, protecting health of workers, and that kind of thing. So it's very important for you to understand what's going on in that supply chain, and there is risk in that, because you could have serious issues going on. You can do things like have written specifications on understanding the different chemicals and materials in your product. You can do audits, but you also want to have knowledge of your suppliers, and you really don't want to end up having a situation like this. I don't know if anybody saw this 60 Minutes segment that happened earlier this year, where Lumber Liquidators was basically in deep trouble for having like high formaldehyde glue and binders in their products, even though they were reporting them to be much lower in emissions. It turns out these products had formaldehyde in them that were 20 times higher than accepted by California rules and regulations, and this is going to create a huge issue for them. I'm sure there's lawsuits and everything else, as well as lost business. And then even for automobile manufacturers, suddenly you've got exploding airbags, or you've got situations where what we saw in Bangladesh a year or so ago, or a couple of years ago, where all these garments are being made, and who knows what's going on in the factories where these things are getting built. So knowing what's going on from your suppliers is going to be critical, because not only can it affect your ability to meet these new requirements for transparency and everything else, but it's going to be really important that you don't end up as a headline in the news or in a lawsuit or something else. And again, knowing that you have suppliers in another country, you got to remember they're going to have suppliers to them as well. So making sure you're understanding that whole chain. Next thing I want to talk about is lifecycle assessment. This is something that's getting a lot of traction. There's a lot of companies doing this. If you want to do an effective lifecycle assessment, you have to understand your supply chain. You're going to have information from the suppliers on the materials and ingredients and products and things they're supplying to you, and being able to reach out to them is going to be really helpful in not only doing life cycle assessments, but also preparing environmental product declarations, health product declarations, answering questionnaires from your customers that might be asking if there's certain chemicals in the product, or if your suppliers have sustainability programs. So life cycle assessment is a great way to get that information and also to identify areas of risk. And when we talk about life cycle assessment, we're essentially looking at the whole process of a product, cradle to grave, or ideally cradle to cradle. And it starts with extraction and processing of raw materials all the way through product use and end of life. And understanding what's going on in your supply chain is going to be critical for getting that information. So what I want to do now is just throw out a few ideas and tips on how to institutionalize a sustainable supply chain. First thing you really got to do is understand and identify your suppliers. And that sounds like a silly thing, but it's really interesting. When we're doing work with a manufacturer, sometimes they don't have a good handle on who's supplying everything to them. There might be one or two people within the organization in purchasing or supply chain management, but generally this isn't well defined, and it usually takes a lot of time to look at the bill of materials, to reach out to these people to get a list of who's supplying what, and then to try to understand, oftentimes there's multiple suppliers. Another thing that's really going to be important is integrating sustainable product attributes into your new product development process. If you want to basically build a solid supply chain program, integrating things like written specifications around material disclosure and information from suppliers or requirements for sustainability, that all needs to be built right into your new product development process. That's really going to help you make this an ongoing program that's going to drive your whole program and keep things moving very smoothly. Another thing that's going to be really important is getting the reporting of the chemicals and materials that you're utilizing. I would not recommend anybody sit back and not know what are the specific chemicals in your product. And what I mean by that is getting the chemical abstract numbers on everything that's going into the product, checking out material safety data sheets, building a database of this information. We still today have issues where we're working with different customers and we get their bill of materials. They're not fully fleshed out as far as the weights of the products. They're not fully fleshed out as far as the chemicals that are in that, different things like that. So there's a lot of this information that's missing, and there's not a simple way to collect it. In fact, we're doing a lot of work with supply chain assessment and auditing, where we're collecting information from some of our clients, going back to their suppliers, getting data, building databases, analyzing the information they're reporting against REACH and RoHS and conflict mineral requirements and different things like that. So all important to build a program. And next month when we talk about benchmarking and measurement, we're going to really talk about how to do that, how to get with your suppliers, how to get the information, and how to really benchmark and understand these things. Another huge thing is supplier training. I cannot emphasize enough how important training is, getting suppliers really engaged. That's one reason we're having the seminar in April 2016 to bring together not only the manufacturers but to get their suppliers at the table with them to work hand in hand in learning and developing a solid program. I mentioned earlier about some of the risks you could have if you're not sure what's going on in different countries, especially what we call low-cost countries like Vietnam and China. Very important to have some type of program where you're auditing and evaluating and approving vendors in these countries. We see issues all the time where there's various things happening. It could be worker rights violations, or it could be situations where you're getting inferior quality materials. Really important to be able to have some type of good system to go back and check with these folks, validate them, evaluate them, and maybe you combine this in your EHS program when they're out doing audits from an environmental health and safety perspective, add the sustainability aspects into that type of audit. So having these audit and inspection requirements fully established and communicated to your suppliers is really important. And then having performance assessments with these folks, getting out and understanding what's going on in their factories, in the products they're making, that kind of thing are going to be very important. I also want to let you know that another way you can really institutionalize things and get some benefit is having a third party do audits and certifications for you. Here's an example from Green Circle Certified. They now have a multi-attribute certification process that covers both product-specific attributes as well as manufacturing-specific. And a big part of this can also start to look at the raw materials, the ingredients, the parts you're buying, and get a good handle on what's going on in the supply chain. And they can provide that service where they're doing that evaluation and then providing a certification and helping you to really build up that database of what's going on based on various products and operations. I mentioned sustainable product innovation. We're going to talk more about this next month when we talk about benchmarking and measurement, but really what sustainable product innovation is using life cycle thinking and integration of sustainability attributes into the new product development process. It's a lot easier to make a product sustainable when it's in the design phase and come back and try to fix it. And most organizations use what we call a stage gate process, where the new product development process follows a series of stages and gates as you move forward from a product idea to full production and market launch. And we've developed some excellent tools that not only allow you to create a scorecard of baselining your products and understanding where they are from a sustainability perspective, but we have other tools where we can integrate these sustainable attributes and different information and tools right into the stage gate process, so it becomes just an automatic way of doing business. And this is a really good move if you're looking to make your products better or to meet supply chain requirements. And if you think about it, most of you that are on here that are manufacturers, you have product requirements. Standard requirements for a good product are it must meet some acceptable level of functionality and performance, has to be good quality, has to meet a certain cost point, might have other things like aesthetic or processing equipment requirements or meeting regulations or whatever. But in this new world that we're in, you really have to start thinking about what can I do to green my product or make it better or less impactful. Things like using more recycled content, decreasing the life cycle carbon footprint, using materials that have no health hazards according to specific lists or regulations. So this is the new paradigm when it comes to making products, and having a solid sustainable product innovation program based on life cycle data is a great way to move forward and make your products a lot better. Like I said, next month we're going to be talking about this in more detail. Another key tip, definitely in your specifications with your suppliers. If you have somebody you're buying parts from or buying raw materials or ingredients, you're going to have a contract with them. Integrating your requirements right into that contract is going to help really secure things and lock in information for you, so you can make it mandatory, part of the signed contract, that they're going to provide to you CAS numbers and chemical ingredient information. They're going to confirm their compliance with ROS and REACH. They're also going to help give you data that you need to help you do your life cycle assessments and build that information up. So having this done in a contractual basis, built into specifications, is really an excellent way to keep things in a standard format. Another thing, I mentioned training earlier, can't emphasize. Here's a couple different shots of some training that we did. The one on the right, that's actually training I did with Stanley Black & Decker quite a few years ago when we kicked off their program. And we're basically in a workshop here looking at some faucets and figuring out how we're going to make these more sustainable, and how we're going to reach down the supply chain and get data. And this other image is a recent training we did where we trained about 250 people on not only sustainable product innovation, but how to start connecting with their supply chain, how to start getting this information. And your suppliers need to understand, what you require, and pulling them into these type of trainings is going to be really important. So I want to have a few minutes for questions here, and it looks like there's a bunch of questions rolling in here. But when we look at this, if you really want to stay competitive in this market, understanding your supply chain is going to be critical. Establishing a solid, sustainable product innovation program is going to be really critical. And then really just having a good system for getting information, tracking it, reporting it, measuring it, very important. And companies that do this are going to see some great benefits. We're already seeing this. We have companies that are definitely pulled together the information needed to meet various government supply chain requirements, environmentally preferable purchasing requirements, and things like that. And we're seeing them actually getting set up as preferred or sole vendors to different folks, or they're winning sales by being able to come in and show how their product's saving energy during its lifetime, or how it's end of life, it's much easier to recycle, or they are clearly stating that they're meeting the requirements of REACH or RoHS, and they're not having any issues with that because they've gone back in their supply chain. So these things are really important. Walmart now has a sustainable leader program. If you fill out one of their questionnaires and you get ranked at a certain level, you could be listed as a sustainable leader. My understanding is that might mean some extra shelf space and things like that. And for folks that aren't doing this, competitors that are just staying the course and not really being innovative, are definitely going to lose sales. So keep this in mind as you move forward. Just want to remind everybody, we are going to be having our seminar, and we're also having a webinar next month to keep this process going. Looks like we've got about 5 more minutes here. I want to definitely take a few minutes for questions, and let me see what we have here. Okay, so here's a question that says, as a supplier, what tools would you recommend for getting in front of existing clients or potential new organizations to demonstrate the sustainable green things we're doing? Well, one thing that you can really do is if you are moving forward and you're doing a lot of great stuff from a sustainability perspective in your company, you're definitely going to want to have some means of conveying that or communicating that with the world. So maybe you can do that in a sustainability report, or maybe you have updates on your website on how you're tracking towards your goals. One thing we really love to do, if someone is making changes in their products, you can definitely do that through Lifecycle Assessment, where you have an LCA on your baseline product, and then maybe you run a LCA after you completed that, or update your LCA, and you can basically show through a spider graph or a radar graph how you've reduced those impacts. There's a lot of organizations that would be interested in learning that and getting that information. So I have another one. It says, our supply chain is complex with suppliers from different countries. What are simple ways to get this info? Now, that's a good question. Typically what we would do is we would develop a solid questionnaire that's built right into the Sustainable Purchasing Program. That questionnaire then gets disseminated out to the suppliers, even in other countries. Oftentimes we have to have that translated into that specific language. And many companies also have big supply chain meetings where they get all their suppliers together once a year to talk about what's going on. And that's a great place to roll this kind of thing out, or to get some things going in that realm. Okay, I've got another one here. It says, if a company is already working with a supply chain on different sustainability aspects, what should they focus on going forward to remain cutting edge? Well, I think to stay cutting edge, I mentioned earlier, really understanding the material ingredients within your products is going to be really important. Starting to get that information on the chemicals and materials and whatnot that are utilized in the product. You're going to want to start collecting that information. You're also going to want to definitely understand their supplier locations and their suppliers. So getting that information is going to be very important. And I also recommend to everybody that's on this webinar, you definitely are going to want to push your suppliers to start doing things within their plants that can really help them to improve the sustainability of their operations. Because that, if you look at what Walmart did by asking questions of all 100,000 suppliers, that raised awareness, and that also is going to help control costs in the future. Okay, I got one more here. It says, for members of the TSC, incorporating their KPIs into supplier surveys or product development processes seems a logical process. Yeah, that's a good comment. I do think that if you have looked at the work that's done by the Sustainability Consortium, they created these various tools now that identify the key impact areas of various product categories. For example, we just did some work for a company that makes sugar, and we were able to look at what the Sustainability Consortium had built around that, and we then were able to correlate some of those requests or requirements from the Sustainability Consortium to develop a strategy for this company on how they might want to report and track some of the attributes that were of key interest to a company like a Walmart or other organizations that are using those TSC tools. So that's a very good point, and definitely keep that in mind. If you are making products that are covered by those categories, that's a great place to look and get started. So I've got a number of other questions here. I'll try to answer one more, but then we're going to wrap it up because this is a 30-minute webinar. Just want to remind everybody that we are having our next webinar on November 12th at 12 o'clock, and that one's going to be called Benchmarking and Measurement, Understanding Your Supply Chain, and it's going to build upon everything we talked about today. So with that, I'm just trying to see if I can answer one more question really quickly here. Oh, here's one. Have you seen that suppliers have been generally receptive to supply chain requirements? Yes, generally, most of them are. Traditionally, I'd say typically when we're collecting data from different suppliers, I would say the vast majority are very responsive and will answer the questionnaires. However, many times they don't understand that information, and you have to go back and work with them to get them to clarify what they're providing. It's only on a rare occasion where a supplier doesn't respond, and usually what the action is there, the company that's trying to get that data from them, if this supplier is not responsive and they have other suppliers that can provide the same product or information, that's a great reason to basically say we're no longer going to work with you. So keep that in mind as you're doing those assessments. So it looks like we're right at 12:30. Excellent. I want to really thank everybody that joined today. It was a great session, and thank you for the excellent questions. If anybody has anything they'd like me to focus on in my upcoming webinars, please feel free to email me. We'll gladly take your suggestions and build that right in. And if there are even topics you want us to really try to cover in some of these upcoming webinars, please let us know, because I will make this as valuable for all of you as I can. Okay, look forward to seeing you next month, November 12th, same time. And also we'll be sending out information shortly on the seminar that we're rolling out in April of 2016. Have a great day, and look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.